This is Arkies in the Beltway, your look at national politics and the Arkansans influencing the discussions. I'm Alex Thomas, Washington correspondent for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, reporting from the nation's capital. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Arkies in the Beltway for the week of April 20th, 2025. Members of Congress remain away from Washington, taking part in a 2-week break from legislative business. With Capitol Hill more quiet than usual, it provides us with an opportunity to dive more into budget reconciliation and the possible impact of the final bill. If you have been listening to the latest episodes of Arkies in the Beltway, first, thank you, appreciate the support. Second, you know the Senate and House of Representatives have approved a budget framework with sights on cutting spending and preserving the 2017 tax cuts. The Senate approved the resolution in the early morning hours of April 5th. Arkansas Senators John Bozeman of Rogers and Tom Cotton of Little Rock joined Republican colleagues in supporting the legislation. The House was supposed to consider the blueprint on April 9th, but the vote was delayed one day. That's when Senate Majority Leader John Thune committed Senate Republicans to working toward $1.5 trillion in spending reductions to take place over the next decade, a significant jump from their $4 billion objective. Representative Steve Womack of Rogers presided over the House floor on April 9th, watching Republican leaders struggle to convince members to support the resolution.
It is not in the Senate's DNA to find the kind of savings that the House has called for. So I have long believed that the floor established in the House and the floor established in the Senate, that there's going to have to be some kind of agreement between the two, and that will require some intense negotiation.
The legislation directs most Senate and House committees to recommend actions for reducing the federal deficit, with exceptions for boosting defense and border security funding. Committees have until May 9th to submit their plans. 3 Arkansans lead committees tasked with proposing steps to reduce the deficit. Senator Bozeman and the Senate Agriculture Committee will need to come up with $1 billion in reductions. Representatives French Hill and Bruce Westerman preside over the House Financial Services and Natural Resources Committees, respectively. Each committee has received instructions to propose $1 billion in deficit reductions. Hill of Little Rock previously told the Democrat-Gazette that his committee will likely consider reducing spending for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Westerman of Hot Springs says his committee will focus on actions generating revenue, such as mining and forestry projects.
We get to start showcasing a lot of work we've been doing for the past year and putting together reconciliation language. You'll see a lot of committee activity developing the language to be rolled into the one big reconciliation bill.
Around $1.1 trillion of the House's directed spending cuts involves 2 committees. The House Agriculture Committee will need to recommend $230 billion in actions to reduce the deficit, and the House Energy and Commerce Committee will need to put forward $880 billion in recommendations. The Senate and House Agriculture Committees have jurisdiction over the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, commonly referred to as food stamps. The House Energy and Commerce Committee oversees matters involving Medicaid, the joint program between state and federal governments, providing health care coverage to low-income Americans. Katie Berg serves as the Senior Policy Analyst for Food Assistance at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
Congress is currently several steps down a path that could lead to very, very deep cuts to food assistance and other supports for low-income families.
Regarding SNAP, the Department of Agriculture reports more than 235,000 Arkansans participate in the program. Berg expects the agriculture committees to propose sizable cuts to SNAP to meet their targets. She says Congress could consider reducing funding through cutting benefits, removing people currently eligible for the program, or passing some federal cost on to states.
What's important to note is that the magnitude of the cuts under discussion leave pretty limited options to change policies to make those cuts.
With Medicaid, Liz Williams, a senior policy manager with KFF, a healthcare policy organization, says any federal reduction in Medicaid spending would place additional pressure on states to deliver coverage.
States could choose to offset those losses of federal Medicaid funds by increasing taxes or making cuts to another program in their budget, like education, which is sort of the next biggest piece of the pie. But as you can imagine, that is not very popular and would be really challenging for states. And so if states are unable to offset the loss of those federal funds, there enters another set of tough choices.
The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services notes around 817,000 Arkansans enrolled in Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program. Arkansas did expand Medicaid under former President Barack Obama's signature healthcare law, but a state trigger law could mean its end if federal funding dips below a 90% match rate. Williams points to a KFF analysis showing more than 240,000 Arkansans could lose Medicaid coverage if Congress changes that rate.
We know that reversing expansion could leave people, without health insurance, and we know that people who are uninsured are less likely to access the care that they need and more likely to face unaffordable medical bills.
Senate and House committees are continuing to work on specifics to meet their targets, but Womack says there will likely be an impact felt from spending cuts.
You can't really get to that level of cuts out of the energy and commerce areas of jurisdiction without digging significantly into Medicaid.
Republicans control both chambers of Congress, but with not much wiggle room to pass a final reconciliation bill, even with simple majority votes. Maine Senator Susan Collins opposed the Senate resolution over concerns about Medicaid's future. A dozen House Republicans sent a letter to GOP leaders in their chamber worried about possible cuts to Medicaid. Womack says getting the Senate and House to pass a budget resolution, that was easy compared to what's next.
If you think this was tough, it gets tougher from here on out.
House Republicans have voiced interest in passing the legislation by Memorial Day weekend. The Senate and House won't be back in Washington until April 28th. Senator Cotton starting his re-election effort in a strong financial position. The Conifer Senate campaign reported nearly $8.4 million cash on hand in its quarterly report to the Federal Election Commission. The campaign brought in more than $1.2 million over the first 3 months of the year, spending around $340,000 during this time. Cotton is currently serving his second term in the Senate. He officially launched his re-election bid in February, just as he started new roles on the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate GOP leadership team. Some other numbers from current office holders. Representative Rick Crawford of Jonesboro has around $846,000 in his campaign's reserves. Representative Hill's campaign ended the first quarter with $2 million in its coffers. Representative Womack's campaign neared the $2 million cash on hand mark, and Representative Westerman reported the most cash on hand among Arkansas's lawmakers with $3.3 million in his campaign's reserves. Senator Bozeman, whose term will expire in January 2029, has $1.1 million cash on hand. And that'll do it for this edition of Arkies in the Beltway for the week of April 20th, 2025. You can stay up to date with all news involving Arkansas at arkansasonline.com. Special thanks as always to the team down in Little Rock. I'm Alex Thomas, and this has been Arkies in the Beltway. Thanks for listening.